Amen. Thank you. Okay. Well, we have more fun ahead of us this morning. We're going to look at conjunctions a little bit more and hopefully get to prepositions, because I know these are the things you most care about in your life. And so, I want to make sure that you're being fed. I know English grammar is like a drug, right? It's addictive, and you just have to have it all the time. So I know that's why you join this class every week now, is because you're getting the fix, this grammar fix. So, but actually, my goal has been to try to continue to just dig a little deeper and give you insights into how, it's not so much like being able to define what a conjunction is or an adverb or a participle, but it's really to understand how the language works, and how do we understand what the author is doing, what he's saying by his use of grammar. And again, as I mentioned before, Greek grammar is very similar to English, or I should say English is similar to Greek. Greek came first, ancient Greek. So a lot of the principles that we're learning here are effectively much of the same principles that we would see in Greek grammar. And so that's a good thing. It's a helpful thing, because then as we're learning this English grammar better, that will only further our ability to understand, when you're reading through a commentary and you see the commentator say, now here we see a prepositional phrase that's modifying the verb. I mean, hopefully after all of this study we've had, you'll be able to understand, well, what that means, and that'll give you even more ability to interact with these commentaries and to interact with interact better with with various resources that you use and things like that. So what I'd like to do is go back to right now we're in this step of the diagramming process where we are identifying the phrases and clauses, the rest of them in the sentence. And the way we do that is by finding what I've called the connector words. And again, those connector words are the conjunctions, the prepositions, the relative pronouns, and the participles. Punctuation is another way that we can use to identify phrases and clauses. And that's something that's a little bit separate, as far as it's not a connector word. They're symbols that are used by the interpreters. But conjunctions, prepositions, relative pronouns, participles. All right, and we've talked for a while now on conjunctions. And again, just think of conjunctions as joiners. They're, like a junction in a road. It joins two roads together. It brings two roads together. And so junctions function that way. And there are two kinds. There's the coordinating kind. That is the kind that joins a part of a sentence parts of a sentence that are grammatically equal, whether those be words, phrases, or clauses. They coordinate. It's kind of like we use that term in English when you talk about what you're wearing, whether it's coordinated or not. Does it go together? Does it match? Like for me, I have to ask my wife to get a tie for me because I don't know how to coordinate. I don't know what the right color is to wear with another color. So she does it for me. But we call that coordinating, putting something together that fits, that goes together. And there are some conjunctions that do that. Now, I want to visit those conjunctions again. If you remember that I mentioned to you before, we can remember those conjunctions by the acronym FANBOYS, right? The JASON acronym. But I want to actually, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and teaching this stuff has really been a benefit for me because I'm going back and I'm actually learning a lot as well. So I appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to study these things. And so as I was looking at fanboys, right, if you can remember, in fact, Jason, can you tell me what fanboys stands for? Which conjunctions does it refer to?
These are words that join parallel statements or parallel clauses and phrases or words.
Do you remember which ones they are?
For, and,
Good.
nor, but, or, yet, and I forgot. So.
Oh,
Yeah.
good job. Excellent. Yeah, these cover the what's classically been described by many grammarians as the 7 coordinating conjunctions. But you know, the last couple of weeks I've been looking at passages, and as I've been putting my notes together and studying, 2 of these just kind of didn't sit right with me. For and so. I was thinking a lot about those 2 conjunctions in particular, and I was trying to think of examples where they coordinated. That is, where they brought 2 words, phrases, or clauses together that were grammatically equal. And as I thought more about it, I realized that for and so typically function more like subordinate clauses. Okay, because, for example, the word for often has the idea of because, right? When it's used as a conjunction. For example, let me, you know, I would like to eat, for I am hungry. All right. Now here, the main sentence is I would like to eat. Okay, that's the independent clause, right? The conjunction here is for, and then the statement I am hungry. Now, how is this conjunction for working here? Is it coordinating these 2 sentences? Are these 2 independent clauses, each presenting an equal thought, an equal statement? If I had said this, I would like to eat and I am hungry. Now that is making both of these statements of equal effect. It's 2 things I'm saying. I would like to eat and I am hungry. But if I say I would like to eat for I am hungry, what am I really saying here? The main thought is I would like to eat, and then for is acting like a subordinate conjunction telling me the reason, why, or because. You see that? It's not bringing 2 equal clauses together. It's actually an independent clause and a dependent clause. This second clause is dependent because the word for functions that way. It gives a reason. So there were many examples like this as I was thinking about all the diagramming I've done in Scripture, and the word for and how often I've diagrammed that word in various passages. And I came to realize that actually this word for acts more like a subordinating conjunction. And it's the same with the word so. The word so, let me give you this example. He went to bed so he could get up early the next day. Now, how is this conjunction so functioning here? Is it bringing 2 equal clauses together? Or is it giving us something else? The main clause here, the independent clause, is he went to bed. The word so is telling us why he went to bed. So that means this next clause is actually subordinate. It's dependent. It's dependent on the first one. So we would diagram it like this. He went to bed, and then so gives us the reason why he went to bed. You guys see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Now I could do a bunch of examples like this. But like I said, as I was studying, you know, when I first started looking at conjunctions, and then I found, you know, several grammars mentioned fanboys. I thought, oh, well, that's helpful. But then as we've been talking about it, and as I've been studying, I thought more and more about the word for and the word so, and I couldn't find any examples in passages of scripture where they function like a coordinating conjunction. They always were functioning like a subordinating conjunction. So then I thought, well, how did this term fanboys come about? And actually it was coined, it was generated about 50 years ago here in the States by an English teacher. And it sort of caught on because it was catchy, fanboys. There's been a lot of discussion about that. And I'll give you in your notes a couple of links. You can look up and look at this yourself, of a couple of technical papers on for and so, and how they function like subordinating rather than coordinating conjunctions. So I'm not going to get into all the details here. I just really wanted to, as we've been discussing these together, I've been learning as well, and I realized that actually we should change this acronym from fanboys to anboy. Okay, I don't know if that means anything in Tagalog or Visayan or Ilonggo, but because really and, nor, but, or, and yet, those truly do function as coordinating conjunctions. For and so are more subordinating in how they function. Now, there may be a few cases where they coordinate. I just can't find any examples yet. So if you guys find some, let me know. But again, I'm trying to think more of how do these connector words work? Because that's what we're trying to get at, is we identify the connector word, and when we do, that connector word will give us insight into how it's connecting things. All right? And so I want to make sure we're clear on that basically conjunctions have two ways they connect. They connect in a coordinating way, or let's go back to the definition up here. Right? Conjunctions connect in these two ways. They connect in a coordinating fashion or a subordinating fashion. Okay? That's the two ways that they function. They join parts of a sentence together that are grammatically equal, that's coordinating, or there are conjunctions that join a dependent clause to another clause. That is, they bring a dependent clause in, but that clause is it's subordinate to another part of the sentence. All right? So really, we need to change this to anboy, and then I don't know, Jason, what an amboy is, but I guess you've been demoted from fanboy to anboy. All right? Are there any questions about that? You know, I apologize for not catching this earlier and teaching you the other, the fanboys approach, but like I said, I'm learning in this process too, as well. And I'm trying to think again, we're focused on scripture. How do I interpret scripture? And from all of my study of scripture and all the diagramming I've done over the last 20 years, like I said, for and so really stuck out to me as these are subordinating conjunctions, at least in my study of scripture. So any comments, thoughts, questions that you have? Yeah,
I was actually going to say, I rather ask you about the same thing, because the problem is when you begin to diagram and you have these two words, for and so, they are clearly introducing subordinate thought. So I was really planning to ask this in one of our sessions, but you're addressing it now.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you. I'm still trying to explore a little bit why it became so accepted, and I haven't found any satisfying explanations, but I have found a number of resources that are supporting this idea. And so, I mean, let's look at a passage together. Let's look at Romans 1 and see what I'm talking about here and how it applies to this particular text. Pastor Robbie, we'll start with you. Can you identify the conjunctions, all the conjunctions in these three verses? We'll start there. Just as you see them, point them out.
Yeah. I'm under obligation both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and the foolish. you find and in verse 14. Actually, they both and actually work as conjunctions there. So, in verse 15, for my part, I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome.
Okay, which one?
So,
Mhm.
in verse 15, so, and also is a conjunction. For, in verse 16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel. For, okay, this is going to be interesting. It's another conjunction. Is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. And there, in the last phrase.
Yeah, and.
Yeah. And some would consider also a conjunction there. So
Yeah, that one. That one's. There's disagreement on that, whether it's functioning that way. Here it seems to be. Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily connecting, because when it is connected with another conjunction, like but also, then it's functioning that way. But whether it's functioning here by itself as a conjunction,
right,
I tend to not. I tend to look at it more as adverbial in this case,
okay,
because it's not introducing a clause or a word here, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's right. So it's not correlative. So
Yeah, it's
that's
not.
right.
So and yeah, you notice the correlative conjunction, which we touched on last time. I'll bring that up again in a little bit. But the ones I wanted to focus on here were, notice there's a so and for and then for. There's another for here. Now, you did not identify that as a conjunction. Why? For salvation. You're muted.
It acts more like a preposition, I think. I'm not so sure.
Yeah. Because, and the way to tell is a preposition is followed by a noun.
Yeah.
Okay. Salvation in this case. A conjunction is followed by a clause.
A clause.
I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God. Those are clauses, right? Subject, verb. And so we know that in those cases, for is functioning like a conjunction. But if the word for is followed by a noun, then we know it's a preposition. We'll discuss that more when we get to prepositions here, but just wanted to point that out. So as we look at this passage, I went ahead and diagrammed it just to save a little bit of time, just so that I could point out sort of how these conjunctions are working in the passage. Notice the both and. I'm under obligation to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. Now, what does the both and do here? He could have just said this, right? I'm under obligation to the Greeks and to the barbarians. Right? That has the same idea. It joins Greeks and barbarians together in a coordinating way. With the addition of this word both and, what is that doing here?
It strengthens the inclusiveness of what he's trying to say here.
Yeah, this gets us back to this discussion of the correlative conjunctions. And the correlative conjunction is a conjunction that has more than one word. So both and, or neither nor, either or, not only but also, right? We talked about this last week with John 5:18. But what happens is when you use a correlative conjunction, you're actually intensifying the conjunction connection. So here, by saying both and, there's emphasis because he's saying both to Greeks. Now remember, we have to consider background context here. When you compare Greeks and barbarians, again, remember, this passage is Romans chapter in Romans, right? So he's speaking to Roman believers, right? He's speaking to Romans in particular. Now, that audience, when you say Greeks versus barbarians, you are giving two extremes. The Greeks are those who are educated, those who are socially elite. They would be the academic, the cultured, that they'd be the top of the social status. Whereas barbarians were considered the bottom. They were illiterate, uneducated, violent. They were considered the lowest class. So here, what Paul is doing, he's saying, I'm under obligation to the elite people and to the bottom people. Okay? To those in power, to those who are considered the top of the social order, social structure, and to those who are the least in the social structure. He says both and by doing that, he's bringing emphasis. He's intensifying that idea that he's, and I'm bringing this up because, again, this is where a slight an understanding of grammar and a slight difference here. All that Paul's added is this word both. All right? But by doing that, he's intensifying his statement here. He's intensifying what he is saying. Okay? And so I think it's important to notice that because this conjunction both and is reflected in the Greek text. All right? He didn't just use the word kai. He used the phrase okay, kai is the Greek word. It's normally translated as and. That's the most common. Sometimes but and sometimes also. Kai has this idea of both and. And that's what's in the Greek text. And so Paul here is trying to bring emphasis. I'm under obligation to everybody, whether at the top or the bottom. And then he says both to the wise and to the foolish. Again, both extremes. The Greeks treasured wisdom, sophos. They saw that as the highest ideal, worldly wisdom. And then the foolish, the idea behind the word foolish there is the same kind of, it's the opposite. It's the opposite idea. And so it's the unintelligent, again, and he's just repeating himself for emphasis. But this is a perfect example of why looking at details and why we're actually talking about all these different kinds of connector words, these conjunctions, can help in your preaching. Because what it does is here, by understanding how these conjunctions work, you see that in the use of the both and, there's emphasis being given by the author. He's intensifying this connection. Does that make sense? All right. So this is a separate topic. It's not dealing with the for and the so, but I thought I would point it out since we're here, this correlative conjunction. Now, let's get to the rest here. Okay, now, so in verse 15, it's introduced by the word so. And I see so as being a result of, he's under obligation. So as a result of this, I'm eager to preach the gospel. I'm under obligation to everybody. And that obligation is to bring the gospel to them. And so he's eager to do that. So this is a result of being under obligation. Okay, the word so here is not introducing a parallel thought, a coordinating thought. It's actually introducing a subordinating thought. It's giving the reason, or the result, excuse me, of what he said in verse 14. So, as a result, I'm eager to preach the gospel. And then notice verse 16, that word for. It's functioning here in a subordinate fashion. That is, I'm eager to preach the gospel for, and this is why I'm eager, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. And then another for it's the power of God. So this for in verse 16 is introducing a clause, and that clause is dependent upon something he said earlier. It's answering the question why. Why am I eager to preach the gospel? Because I'm not ashamed of it. Why am I not ashamed of it? For it is the power of God. Okay? So he's not, if this were a coordinating conjunction, it would be this. He'd be saying, I'm under obligation both to Greeks and barbarians, and then he'd be saying, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Now, how are those connected? They're not here. That's not the connection. This conjunction for is not coordinating between I'm under obligation and I'm not ashamed. And it's not coordinating between I am eager and I'm not ashamed. Because the word for doesn't function that way. It functions, it gives a reason. It's, you know, you could use the word, again, because. I'm eager to preach the gospel because I'm not ashamed of the gospel. All right? And that's why I have it under I'm eager, because I believe it's modifying that. And then here, even more clearly, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God. Here, it is the power of God is the reason I'm not ashamed. Again, the conjunction for is not coordinating these two ideas. It's not, I am not ashamed, for it is the power of God. These aren't equal clauses here that are being brought together. Rather, this second clause is a dependent clause because it's giving the reason why I'm not ashamed. Okay? And so this is one passage that gives us an example of the conjunction for and the conjunction so act like a subordinate conjunction, not a coordinating conjunction. All right. Any questions on this?
This is so helpful, Tim, because it could lead to confusion, especially because we included for in fanboys.
Yeah.
And when really the thought is so clearly subordinate. I can't think of a scripture passage where for is a coordinating conjunction. It's mostly subordinating. So anyway.
Yeah, I can't either, because for, as a conjunction, the word for means because. That's what it means. It's a reason. Now, when it's used as a preposition, there are some other uses. But as a conjunction, and how do I know? I know it's a conjunction when it's followed by a clause. All right, when it's followed by, as in this case, a subject, I, and a verb, am ashamed. Okay? Or this one, for it is the power of God. So that's a clause there. So I know this word for is a conjunction. And in this case, the conjunction for means because. All right? And the same with so. So is often short for so that. Again, usually tells the reason why. It's a shorthand way to say so that, usually. Or sometimes it's used, in this case, it's being used as the word thus. All right? Thus, for my part, you know, as a result of being under obligation, thus, I'm eager to preach the gospel. All right? Okay, so we need to modify our understanding of the coordinate conjunctions. Think of and boy. All right, those are and, nor, but, or, and yet. Okay? Those are the 5 coordinate conjunctions. Now, there are some situations where we have a correlative conjunction. And again, a correlative conjunction is a conjunction plus usually like an adverb. All right, so again, both and is an example we saw earlier. Correlative conjunctions can act like coordinating or subordinating, depending on what they are. I think I put in your notes, if anybody read the student notes last week, I put in more details on this correlative conjunction. I'll follow up and review that a little bit later here. But when you think conjunctions, though, there are 2 other types, correlative and then what's called a conjunctive, sorry for the technical verbiage here, a conjunctive adverb, all right? There's one, remember this term so you can sound smart to people. You know, when you're preaching, this is a conjunctive adverb here. You know, then people will think you're really smart. But really, both correlative conjunction, that sounds fancy too. You could use correlative conjunction in your sermon too. And they'll want to give you a doctorate degree right there on the spot. After you preach, they're just going to say, I'm going to call you Dr. Harris, because you preach and you use big terms, big words. But seriously, these 2 other categories really act, all conjunctions will act in one of 2 ways, subordinating or coordinating. All right, so even though we have the correlatives and the conjunctive, they're still going to act like either a coordinating or subordinating conjunction. Okay, that's the only way conjunctions work. They join together, and the way they join is one of 2 ways. They join either 2 equivalent phrases or clauses, or they join a dependent clause to another clause. That's the only way they work. Okay, so let's do some more exercises, just identifying the conjunctions and then indicating the type. Pastor Renee, you're the next person on my screen. So I'm going to ask you to take a look at this passage and let us know what conjunctions you see and then what kind of conjunction they are. And we'll just do this one verse at a time. So take verse 21.
And although you were formerly alienated and hostile in mind, engaged in evil deeds. The word "and" at the beginning, Pastor Tim.
Very good.
And also another "and" between alienated and hostile.
Very good. Okay.
That's for verse 21.
All right. What about 22?
22 is the word "yet" at the beginning. And in order.
All right. Actually, yeah, in order to.
In order to, and the word "and."
Yep.
And lastly, and beyond, end.
Okay. Very good. Does anybody see any others here, or do you see any others, Renee? Got all of them?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. I see one more. Can anybody find it?
How about although?
Yes. Very good. Thank you, Brother Raleigh. Although. All right. Now, let's identify what kind of conjunction these are. All right. So, Manny, we're going to have you do that. Tell me what kind of conjunction this are. So the first one we have is and. What kind of conjunction is that? Coordinating or subordinating?
And is a coordinating conjunction.
Yep, just remember and, boy. Okay, how about although?
Although is not among the and boy, so it must be a subordinating.
Yep, very good. That's right. So it's subordinating. I'll put an S for that. Okay, then we have another and here.
And is coordinating.
Good. Now how about yet?
Yet.
So,
It's coordinating.
yep. What you want to do is just remember and, boy, as you go through this. And if you want, even just write it down. But yeah, yet is part of and, boy. So it does function as a coordinating conjunction. It has more the idea of a but. It's a contrastive. Okay, how about in order to? Is that coordinating or subordinating?
In order to is subordinating.
Very good. Okay, and then we have and
is coordinating. And another coordinating.
okay, good. Now, by doing this, this tells you exactly how you're going to diagram. All right? Because we look at the first and here, and I separate out my conjunctions. So and is coordinating. Now, it's not coordinating within the sentence, right? Because it's at the beginning of the sentence. So this and here is coordinating to another thought that he gave earlier, either the previous verse or previous verses, okay? So it's still a coordinating conjunction, but here it's coordinating two thoughts, two paragraphs, two verses, or perhaps, you know, coordinating with another chapter. We'd have to go into the context to see. So here it's coordinating. It's not coordinating inside of a sentence, but it's coordinating between sentences or between paragraphs. Now this word although, it's subordinating. What does subordinating mean? It's joining a dependent clause to another clause. Okay? So in this exercise, if we were diagramming this, we would want to find the independent clause first. And where is that? Manny, I'm going to ask you, in verses 21 and 22, can you find the dependent clause, independent clause, sorry, the main subject and verb?
In verse 21.
And 22, these two verses here, where is the independent clause?
You were formerly alienated.
Okay, now, can that be an independent clause if it is introduced by a subordinating conjunction?
No, Pastor Dean.
That's correct. Remember, coordinating, joins, equal, grammatically equal, phrases or clauses, but subordinating joins a dependent clause to another clause. Okay, this is key. This word dependent. So that's telling me, although I know it's subordinating, it's not one of the and boys, it's not a correlative. Okay, I know it's subordinating, so I know that tells me that this "you were formerly alienated" is a dependent clause. It's depending on something else. So I know it's not my independent clause. You see how understanding these conjunctions can help you? And it's the same then, because notice you were formerly alienated, hostile in mind. Okay, that also is a clause, but it's dependent because the word and there is connecting it to this dependent clause. And then the third one, engaged in evil deeds. That also is dependent. Because of the comma here, it tells me it's these three clauses are dependent clauses introduced by the subordinating conjunction although. So I know these things I've highlighted in yellow, these clauses, they're dependent by just the grammar. Because they're introduced by this Subordinating conjunction, although. How do I know it's subordinating? Because it's not one of the and boy. Any questions here?
So, Pastor Tim, suppose it is preceded by a coordinating conjunction. For example, in verse 22,
Okay.
it is the word yet is a coordinating conjunction.
Yes.
We can now, he has reconciled you as a dependent clause.
Yeah, so if I go to, let's see, I think I diagrammed it here. I'll just show you the diagram. The independent clause is this. Let me highlight and. So what's going on here is and yet are connected together, linking back to something he has said prior. And yet he has now reconciled you, although you were formerly alienated. That's the idea. So the and the yet are working together in a coordinating fashion to not only link what's inside verses 21 and 22, but also it connects back to, I don't remember where. I'd have to look back in Colossians 1. But what I want you to see and understand is this although really, really helps us, because it's telling me, okay, I know it's subordinate. I know it's modifying something else. It's because a subordinating clause always introduces a subordinating conjunction always introduces a dependent clause by definition. That's the grammar. So I follow the grammar because that's my guiding rules, my guiding principles, and the grammar tells me, although subordinating, therefore what follows it, the clause that follows it is dependent. Now I got to figure out what it's dependent on and how it's dependent. Although tells me how it's dependent, it's a concession. It means like, even though this is true, or something like that. So the main idea here is he has reconciled you. That's the independent clause. It's introduced by this coordinating conjunction, yet. So that's how I know it's not a subordinate clause, because yet is a coordinating conjunction. It introduces this idea of contrast. Now the contrast is happening with what is said in the although, but again, we have to look at it as it's connected to the and yet, and that brings us to something he said earlier. But the main point here is he has reconciled you, although you were formerly alienated. And then he adds some more phrases below. In his fleshly body, that's where he reconciled you. Through death, that's how he reconciled you. In order to present you, that is why. Now, in order to present you, again, notice that introduces a dependent clause, and it's subordinate. In order to is subordinate. So I know it's not a main independent clause. It's subordinate to something else because it's introduced by a subordinating conjunction. All right? And then we see here the coordinating conjunction is actually, in this case, coordinating these words. It's not coordinating two independent clauses here. It's coordinating these words. These are all parallel in grammatical function. Okay? So coordinating conjunction, and again, it's just and boy plus some correlatives we'll look at later. Coordinating conjunction brings together grammatically equal phrases, words, or clauses. All right, I'm going to keep repeating this because I'm telling you guys, when you see these conjunctions, I want immediately to pop in your mind, okay, I know what follows, I know how it works. All right? So I see this conjunction yet, I know that what follows it, it's being coordinated to something else above. All right? of equal grammatical value. But if I see a subordinating conjunction, always introduces a dependent clause. Sometimes a phrase. But the key word here is dependent. Right? That's why it's called subordinating. It's subordinating what follows it. It's putting lower in rank what follows it. So it's going to introduce a dependent clause by definition. So by going through this sentence, just looking at the connector words, at the conjunctions, you already are understanding how these phrases and clauses are connected together in some way. Because you're understanding, okay, I see the subordinating conjunction, so I know what follows it is dependent. I know it's going to be modifying something else. Now, my next step is to figure out what it's modifying. All right? That's the third step in the diagramming process. But in this second step, you're simply identifying those conjunctions, and the type of conjunction will tell you how the sentences work, how what follows it fits into the sentence. Okay? Now, I don't mean to be overly repetitive, but I want to try to embed this point in you, so that I want you to begin, as you're just looking at passages, you see these things automatically. If you can identify the conjunctions, and then you know what category they're in, whether they're coordinating or subordinating, you're already interpreting the sentence based on the grammar. All right? It's like, have you seen The Matrix? You guys seen that movie? The Matrix, and Neo, you know, when he gets to that point near the end and he can just look and he sees the computer code, right? He doesn't see he just sees the code.
Mm.
He can see through the imagery. Well, that's what I want you guys to be with the text, is when you see these things, they should pop out at you, and just as you get more and more familiar and practice more, and then knowing how these different connector words work, then you will just begin to see and make connections automatically in your mind with how these things all fit together. You know, Pastor Vincent is like this. You know, he doesn't preach with notes. Okay? And often what he does, he doesn't even take notes when he's studying, usually. Because his mind works in such a way that he can look at a passage and he'll look at the Greek, the original Greek, and these things pop out at them. He just sees all these connections because his mind works in such a way. He's like Neo. We should call him Neo. You know, he can look through the passage, and he just sees those connections because he knows, you know, like although subordinating conjunction. So I know that this next phrase, this clause, you were formerly alienated, is going to be dependent. Okay, I can see the main clause is he's reconciled you. So although is subordinate to this. I mean, that's just, he's automatically piecing all that together just by understanding the grammar. And then also how his mind works helps him in this regard. So I'm slowing down and focusing on these connector words because they are the key to unlocking the diagram, and they're the key to unlocking how to interpret and how to see these different connections between the phrases and clauses. Okay? So let's look at another example.
Tim,
Yes.
I have a is the word although a conjunctive adverb, or is there such a thing as a conjunctive preposition? I'm not so sure.
Although
And second question.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
The second question is, in your diagramming of verse 22, why did you put the words before him under in order to and not under to present you?
No, you're correct. That was a misalignment problem.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, when I changed the font size, it messed up my tabs. Thank you. yeah, where to present is the, and we could argue that holy, blameless, and above reproach could actually have the implied idea of as. So it's really how to present you. That's another possibility. That's for another discussion. And if that were the case, it'd be like this. I would probably be inclined to interpret it that way. But that would require more thought about that. All right, grammatically, and here's where we distinguish now with our exegetical work. Grammatically, there's two possibilities that it could be functioning as an objective complement, meaning a second object, so to speak, modifying you, or it could be the idea as a comparative, how to present you as holy. Those are both grammatically acceptable options. You would have to kind of, in the context, figure out which one it is. The grammar doesn't answer everything for us, but it just gives us some guidance. All right. Okay.
But at this point, it isn't as critical, right, Tim? In terms of how it would affect the meaning of what Paul was trying to say, whether you do it that way, or whether you put it before under you, or connected to you, or connected to before him, right?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the idea is
yeah.
Either way, you are the one. He's reconciled you to make you holy, to make us holy.
Yeah, that's right.
Blameless beyond reproach.
Yeah.
So I think that the specifics as to how that works, which it's still there's an objective here, a goal. The goal is to present us as holy, blameless, and beyond reproach. So whether or not we see this as an object complement or as adverbial, won't change our interpretation how we preach it. And like I say, the diagram is just the start. It opens up and exposes some of these questions, and then you have to, through further study, with looking at resources, with thinking more about the text as a whole, and then as you put together the what, why, how, that's when these questions, you need to answer them in your mind. Okay.
So Pastor Tim, I'm glad you said that it's just the first step, because it could be confusing for us. For example, if we check the ESV, that although is untranslated.
Oh, okay. Let me look at that. That's a good observation.
ESV starts with "and you."
Colossians 1. And you, who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his body. So here, let me. Okay. We'll just put it down here. All right, that's interesting. And you.
So it opens up questions like this, the diagramming, and then it led me to check on the Greek, and the word translated there is nuni.
Yeah, let me see. Yeah, well, here. Let's just do this together. All right. Where's the Logos? All right. Can you see my my Logos open here? Do you see that? Okay. So here's the ESV, translation. And then over here to the right is my Greek text. And so notice here that word chi. So you guys you're already becoming Greek experts, right? Because you know what chi is, right? Chi is a coordinating conjunction in Greek, normally translated as and, sometimes but, sometimes also, but it's it's coordinating conjunction. Now this is the word humos. Here is you. Okay, that's the pronoun you, and then this word pate is formally. Okay, it's an adverb. If you look below here at the bottom, can you guys see the bottom? Do you see the little note down at the bottom there? Bottom right? I don't know if you can see it on your screen. It's a small font. As I scroll over the word, at the bottom there, it gives the details. So it tells you the root word, and then it tells you some conjugates it. So if I go to chi, look at chi. Conjunction, logical connective, and then it's just translated as and. You guys see that? I know it's a small font there, sorry. So as I scroll over the words, you can look down at the bottom there and see yourself. This is humos, which again is from the pronoun su, which is you. So, and you formerly being, all right, that ontos is a participle from the verb eimi, to be. So it's literally being. And you formerly being, and then here's the word for alienated. Menus. And you being alienated, and here's the idea of the hostile, or I think it says enemy down there. Hostile in the mind. That's in the mind. In the working of evil. Oh, that's interesting. So in the ESV, there is no conjunction although.
Pastor Tim, regarding the translation of conjunctions, is there an interpretative factor in the decision of the translators? So, for example, here there is, if I will follow the ESV, it is not. It is it, and is the only conjunction here, so it's a coordinating conjunction.
Yes, and so here, this is a very good point, Manny, because in the diagram, what we do is you start with the translation that you normally use. So if you're normally ESV, you start there. You go through, you diagram that one, and then when you're done diagramming, the next step is you go and look at other translations. All right, so you're actually taking us to a step down the road, but this is good. I'm glad you brought it up. And so you'll look at other translations, and here we notice a pretty significant difference between the NAS and the ESV. So you would note that. What I would do is, before I even look at the original, okay, I have the NAS here. I'll open that up, right? And although it has this conjunction, you were formerly alienated. The ESV just and you who were once alienated. The NIV says, once you were alienated. Whoops. Oh, nuts. I lost it. Bring it back. Notice the NIV says, once you were alienated. They don't even put the conjunction in. Any conjunction. From God and we're enemies. The New King James, which is the other one I look at, and you who were once alienated. So it's the same as the ESV. So now I notice, okay, that's a significant difference. If that although is in there or not. So how do I get to the final answer? Well, comparing the translations exposes a significant difference. All right. So I basically have, I have these two, I have the NAS, which is, and although you were formerly alienated, and then I have the ESV, and you who were once alienated. All right, this, now I say it's significant because that although is a subordinating conjunction. So by putting that in there, it affects how we understand what follows it. Now, how do we come to a conclusion? Well, what you need to do is go to an interlinear. All right, go to BibleHub.org, for example. So I'm going to try to do that. See if this will let me do that. Let me open up my, by the way, guys, there's an app you can get on your phone. Bible Hub has an app where it downloads the site on your phone. It's really cool. So you can have it and it'll function there on your phone, and it's a lot faster, actually, than the going to the website. So I've just started using that more. So it's a nice handy way to, I've been using it at church and stuff, to pull up the interlinear without having to use the website. But here, I'm going to pull up. All right, Bible Hub. Okay. Let me share that. All right, can you guys see my Bible Hub? You guys see that? Okay, good.
Yes, Pastor.
All right, so I'm going to go to Interlinear. So notice I'm Interlin. Hopefully you guys have been using this. We're going to pop over. It's Colossians 1. And I'm just going to click the chapter so I can see the whole chapter. And this is a lot faster on the app. I really like the app. All right, so I'm going to go down to verse 21. All right, everybody see that? Verse 21 here. Everyone's got it? Okay. Now here, again, the middle line, there's 5 lines here. The middle row is the Greek text. And so we can see here the Greek text, and then below that in red is the literal translation of each word. So notice, and, kai, you, once or formerly, being, and this is the word alienated, and hostile, in mind, etc., etc. So here we're looking, and there's no although. The word for although in Greek escapes me right now. I have to look that up. Honestly, I forgot. There is a Greek word that conveys the subordinating conjunctive idea of although. But now what do we realize here? Okay, the ESV and the New King James are more closely reflected in the translation, more closely reflect the Greek text. Here, the New American Standard has added something in. And they try to do that in order to convey the idea, but in doing that, they actually significantly affect our diagram. Okay, how do they affect it? Well, let's go back. So you guys are cool here, right? You see the interlinear, and you see there's no although. It's literally and you once, and then notice here, by the way, this is a participle. Mm-hmm. Being. You being alienated.
Mm-hmm.
That also is important to consider. And that's, so let's go back to, I'll compare these in the, I'll take it back to our notes here. All right, so we've got, let's take that out, put it out of the way. All right, so what I've done here, I'm going to shrink this a little bit. Hopefully you guys can still see it. Okay, that's the New American Standard diagram. Because of the subordinating conjunction, although, that's why we indented what followed, because by definition, grammatically, subordinating conjunction introduces a dependent clause. Now, we just learned, oh, gee, there is no subordinating conjunction, although, in the Greek. Okay, so my ESV version, which ESV gets a point today, and so the NAS loses a point. All right, so ESV, let me slide it over so we can line it up a little better. And I'm going to try to, all right, so, and coordinating conjunction, you who once were alienated. Now it's literally who being alienated, but that's okay. It's still the idea. It's modifying you. It's describing you. You who once were alienated and hostile, and you doing evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his body. So the rest of this will be the same. In his body, by his death, in order to present you. Okay? So the rest of the paragraph is going to be the same between them. Do you guys see that? That he has now reconciled. All the rest of this here, I could do this just to, okay, the word order's changed a little bit, but it's essentially the same idea. The significant difference is verse 21 and the beginning of verse 22, because now there is no subordinating conjunction. So now actually this whole part here is modifying you. And you is actually the object of the independent clause. He has reconciled. So this is what it would look like. Let me just do it and then we'll talk about it. All right, and then what I like to do is, where's my, actually I'm gonna have to do it this way. Oh, nuts, it's on another, okay. All right, there it is. See this line here? This line, I use it to tell me that this is part of the same sentence. He has now reconciled you. That's my main subject, verb, object. Subject he has reconciled is the verb. You is the object. So essentially, let me try to see if I can squeeze this all together so you can see it. Hopefully, whoops, that didn't help. All right. All right, hopefully you can see, here's the difference between verse 21 and these two translations. All right, in NAS, because they included that subordinating conjunction, although we now understood this as a dependent clause. But after looking at other translations, and then finally the interlinear as our final decider, we realized actually the ESV was much better. He has reconciled you is the main clause. Now notice in the NAS, it did put you as the object. See that? It basically repeated you. Now you is not in the Greek text twice. It's only there once. Now why does this matter? Well, one, we want to be as grammatically accurate as possible, right? We want to most closely follow the Greek text. All right, so the ESV has done that in this particular case. And the second thing is, now we have understanding that the focus here is he has reconciled you, and there's this description of you, which at the end of the day, we would get the same idea from both translations, I think, right? But it does affect sort of how we understand the grammar here and how the diagram would work. And so the NAS put this word although in because they must have thought that that would be easier to read than and you who were once alienated and hostile in mind. I guess they thought it flowed more smoothly, or I don't know their reason for doing that. But the point of this exercise here is just so that recognize that there are differences, and those differences will affect the diagram. And so you want to make sure after you diagram in your translation to double check that translation. Now, you don't have to compare to other English translations. If you want to go straight to the interlinear, that's fine too. But I like to look at my other English translations first, because that'll often tell me, I mean, technically I just go straight to the Greek anyway, but I'm just saying that if you're not comfortable or familiar with Greek, it's still helpful to look at the other translations first and see if you can see anything obvious, and that will help guide you when you're looking at the interlinear. Now, there are some cautions for the interlinear. I think Doc Quinn had a question a few weeks ago about a particular thing he noticed in the interlinear. And so we have to be careful with interlinears because we don't know everything about Greek grammar. But that's why I'm trying to equip you with the English grammar, because that will help you with a lot of the Greek grammar, not all of it, but with a good portion of it. So you'll be better equipped to use the interlinear properly. All right. But here, for things like this, we can look at the interlinear and see that, this word although is not even there. So the better translation is the ESV, or the New King James, I believe, also translated it this way. So the ESV, this diagram, more closely reflects the Greek text. Any questions?
Yeah,
Thank you,
Tim.
Manny. Good insight. Yes.
Even just at first glance, if I were using, for example, the ESV or the New King James, is it safe to say that seeing that verse 21 really is not an independent clause in itself, should that already signal to me that it is subordinate to something else, possibly the next verse?
Which clause are you talking about?
Like verse 21 in itself is not an independent statement.
Correct. Yes.
Because of the personal pronoun who, or the participle being. Is that a clue? I'm just saying at first glance, is that a clue that although it is introduced by the word and, the rest of the verse really is subordinated to something?
Yes. Yeah, in this case, how is it subordinate? And it's really subordinate under the object you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not subordinate to the verb, has reconciled.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Now, that's a detail of the grammar that at the end of the day, I think if any of us were preaching this passage, we would understand
Yeah.
he has reconciled you is the main thought. And the idea, although we were formerly, is not an inaccurate understanding, but technically it is accurate grammatically. The ESV is more correct. Now, one thing I didn't point out to you, but in the interlinear, there is a conjunction at the beginning of verse 22. It's the conjunction de, delta epsilon, which can mean but, also, or yet.
Yet.
So there should be a yet here. Whoops. All right, yet should be here. So the ESV left that out. The NAS included it. So there are these two, and this almost is acting like a correlative, and yet. And yet he reconciled you. Or, like I said, de can also be and, but, it's typically but, yet, and then and. That's probably the order of, so that's why they chose yet. Because and but doesn't make a lot of sense sometimes. But anyway, I think that's connected to it's linking to what was said before. So where's that? Yeah, you made a point there I thought was good. Oh, yeah, so you notice verse 21 is all that it's subordinate in some way, and we're going to look at a verse, probably not tonight, but Ephesians chapter 2 does the same thing, you know, and you were dead in your trespasses and sins. Actually, it's the same construction, and you being dead in trespasses and sins. Paul does the same thing there. Now, the translators translate it as you were dead. Like here, it's translated, you were formerly alienated. But technically, the ESV, or even the ESV didn't include it, it's technically you being alienated. We'll look at that when we get to that text in Ephesians later. I think next week or the week following, we'll take a look at that. That passage is actually a very interesting text that's not often correctly understood. All right, any other comments or questions about this Colossians 1? We sort of gone beyond the conjunctions a little bit, but like I told you, knowing these conjunctions and then confirming which ones are actually there in the Greek text tells you how they work. So this conjunction in order to, if we go back to, let's go back to our interlinear. All right. Hopefully you guys can see it. See the interlinear? All right. Notice verse 22. Now, and then here's that conjunction, de. Notice it's identified as a conjunction. And here they describe it as however, the literal translation, but I think yet is a good one. Now, he has reconciled, and they put you in brackets because there is no subject here, actually. The interlinear interpreters included that word you, so thankfully they put it in brackets, so you know that they're adding that. The you is up here. See this you? That's the object of the verb. Paul started the sentence with the object. And then the rest of verse 21, he's describing the object, you. Now, what does that tell us? What's Paul wanting to draw attention to first? Right? The you, the condition of the object, the state of the object, you. You being alienated, hostile, etc., he has reconciled in the body of the flesh. And then now we get to here. Here's my in order to present you. That's the verb parastesi. And notice it says it's an infinitive. It's not a subjunction, subordinating conjunction either. Ah! We're going to talk about infinitives, but not tonight, or not today, not this morning. Manny's got a little bit of blood coming out of his nose, so we're not going to introduce infinitives today. But that's another kind of what's it? It's called a verbal, which means it has a verb in it, but it doesn't act like a verb. Here it's acting like a conjunction. It's acting like actually an adverb, giving the idea of purpose. Okay? But I just wanted to, like I said, looking at the interlinear can be very helpful, because here we realize, oh, this technically is not a subordinating conjunction. So did the NAS, did the ESV, did they interpret this right by saying in order to? Was that a correct idea that they're presenting here? And because it's technically not a conjunction. Well, in this case, an infinitive is acting like a conjunction. So they did interpret it correctly, but that discussion is for another day. I just wanted to point that out to you. If some of you were looking at the interlinear and got to this word to present and notice, wait a minute, there's no conjunction here. Notice here, verse 21, it says conjunction under the word kai. See that? And then here later, kai, it says conjunction. And then later we get to verse 22, de, it says conjunction. Okay, I'm good. But then, like I said, we get to that word to present, and there's no, I say, wait a minute, there's no conjunction down here. What's going on? I've been misled. Another error in the ESV or New American Standard. Well, not necessarily. I need to understand how infinitives work. All right, so that's why we're going to talk about it later. Not tonight. Again, Pastor Manny, I understand we're going to limit ourselves. I don't want you to bleed in anymore. But notice, this is why I told you before, interlinears are very powerful, very helpful, but you've got to be careful. If you don't know enough about the grammar, or you don't know enough about how Greek works, you could get yourself in trouble. And so here, I don't want you to look at this word here and to present and then notice that there's no conjunction and then say, oh, this translation is not correct either. Actually, in order to is a correct translation. The interlinear should have put that here. Instead of just saying to present, it should have put in order to. But that's an interpretive decision in some ways. So, okay. That was a little bit extra. Just bonus material to get you excited for the future. Now you're all going, oh, I can't wait for infinitives. I'm so excited. I'm going to dream about infinitives for the next couple of weeks. All right. So that's good. You can, I'll give you another fix later, your English grammar fix. Okay. So let's, let me just make one more brief comment, and then it looks like our time has escaped us once again. Are there any questions of what we covered here, what we've been talking about? Something that doesn't make sense, please ask.
Tim, I was asking earlier what the word although is. Is it a conjunctive adverb or?
Oh, yeah, I think although functions as a conjunctive adverb, but it is part of conjunctive adverbs are function like conjunctions, as like subordinating conjunctions. So yes, you could, technically speaking, as a part of speech, it is a conjunctive adverb, but it really functions like a subordinating conjunction here. That's why I said earlier. In fact, I'll close with that if I've got that in the notes here. Here we go. Other types of conjunctions. There's two other parts of speech or classes of words that act like conjunctions. One is the correlative conjunction, which we've talked about. And there are correlatives which act like coordinating conjunctions, and that's this list here. And then there's these correlative conjunctions. Again, correlative just means they're pairs. There's two words that make up one conjunction idea, all right? There are some that act like subordinating conjunctions, and that's this list here, okay? Then, so there are correlative conjunctions, which just think of it as more than one word making up one conjunction. Then there are what's called conjunctive adverbs, like Pastor Robbie just brought up. Here are some examples. We could include although here as well. And technically, these are words which make up a different category, a different grammatical category, but essentially just think of these all function like subordinating conjunctions. So that's what I call them. Even though an English grammar professor would correct me, it's still, I'm not so much concerned about the technical description of these words as how they function. How do they work? That's what I want. That's what we care about when we're doing diagramming. And so how do they work? They work just like subordinating conjunctions. They introduce a dependent clause.
Right.
Okay. So that's what I care about. Now, sometimes you might see them, like if a sentence like, let me think. I skipped dinner, although hungry. Technically, this is a phrase, hungry, because there's no subject. So technically, this although is acting like a conjunctive adverb here. But I can't remember all this stuff. All I wanted to think, okay, I know although is acting is like a conjunction here. I skipped dinner. Why? Or even though, although hungry, that's a concession, meaning even though I was hungry, I skipped dinner. So technically it's saying, although I was hungry. That's the implied subject and verb. Okay? So that's why, Pastor Robbie, technically the word although is categorized as an adverb. But notice it's called a conjunctive adverb because it functions like a conjunction. It's joining a dependent idea. In this case, it was a phrase, hungry. Hungry is technically an adjective. But the idea that it's joining is although I was hungry. So I just try to keep it as simple as I can. And for me, a simple idea is, okay, I've really got two kinds of conjunctions, coordinating and subordinating. Now, there are these other categories, these correlative conjunctions, but they basically act like either subordinating or coordinating. And then I've got these conjunctive adverbs. Well, they act like subordinating. So I'm putting together a list of conjunctions, prepositions, relative pronouns. So I'm putting together a list sort of for you to have as a resource so that when you're going through this process and you're identifying these connector words, you'll have a sort of a go-to list that you can look at to see, you know, look for the particular words to see what kind of connector words they are. And so I'm trying to keep that list simple, so that otherwise this is why English grammar, or when you study grammar in any language, it can get overwhelming and actually end up not being helpful because there's just so much. And sometimes you get so much information that you really, it doesn't further understanding. It actually brings more confusion. So I'm trying to figure out the best way to minimize the confusion. So that's why I just think when you think conjunction, think this. And I'll end with this. All right. There are functionally only two types of conjunctions to consider when analyzing a sentence: those which, here's the key word, coordinate, and those which subordinate. That's it. In order to simplify diagramming, one can classify conjunctions into these two categories. All right. Now, you should just be aware of what are coordinating conjunctions. And we know that coordinating is easy. It's and boy, and then there's some correlative. So there's and boy, there's both and, there's either or. Okay, we have that list. I'll give you that list of those. And then there's a bigger list of subordinating conjunctions. Okay, there's like, I don't know, 50, something like that. Now, there are a few that are helpful to just remember, but then you don't have to memorize all of them. But just think there's really only two categories: those words which coordinate, act as coordinating conjunctions, those which act as subordinating conjunctions. All right? And the important idea with subordinating is this idea that it joins a dependent clause. And I should put sometimes phrase to another clause. But that dependent is really, really important to remember. All right. You guys have had enough. I've had enough. We can continue this discussion next week. Again, I hope it was helpful. I hope it wasn't too technical to be confusing, but when you ask me questions, that helps me to know where I'm being confusing. So I really depend on those questions, your questions in your mind, or comments, or maybe you might catch me on something that I say wrong. Please point those things out, because I want to be as clear as I can. And English grammar is a difficult topic to be clear on. So, all right, any final comments or questions before I ask Brother Gary to close us in prayers, or any other comments, questions? All right, as the title to a very famous book, enough is enough. So we're done. I've had more than enough today. All right, Gary, can you have a prayer?
Okay, let's pray. Thank you so much, Pastor Tim.
Thank you.
Father, we just would like to acknowledge your goodness and mercy towards each one of us, especially to Pastor Tim. Thank you so much for his heart, Lord, and laboring for us to teach us, Lord God. Thank you so much for all the learning that we just had this morning.